So this is your reversible Japanese knot bag. So as you can see from the mandala elephants, you've got the darker colour at the bottom, paler one at the top, and when I pull this through and turn it inside out, you've got the contrasting colours there. And it fastens by closing over when you thread the long loop through the smaller loop like so, and pulling it up. They're quite big bags as well, I think bigger than you'd expect them to be. But they're not difficult to make. I've come up with quite, I think, ingenious way of making the handles at the top, and that's what I specifically want to show you in this video. So the pattern is just for the handles, and the rest of the bag depends on the size and the width of the fabric that you have. So if you're going to go for one of those two kits that you've just seen, the fabric is 44 inches or 112 centimetres wide, and that's the largest size bag that you're going to make. But if you've got 140 centimetre wide fabric, like with the lilac cherry blossom, you could make a fuller bag out of that as well. So those are your two pattern pieces, and your full instructions in there as well. So of course the first thing you're going to do is to cut these out. And then it's really important the way that you lay these on your fabric, because we really want to make the most of your fabric. Now if you're buying those two kits, you will have 60 centimetres of fabric. If you're going for this kit, it's particularly wide, so you've just got half a metre. If you're not going for a kit but you're buying your own fabric, 60 centimetres is ideal because it gives you a little bit of wiggle time. If you have half a metre of fabric, you should be able to just squeeze the pieces on there and make them fit. So you're going to lay out your fabric right sides together first of all. So obviously this is a plain, so it doesn't really have a right and wrong side, but if it was a pattern fabric, I've got one pattern facing upwards and one pattern facing downwards. So they're right sides together. Now take into account we don't want to use the selvage. So lay those out together and then arrange your pattern to make the most of the space that you have. Now particularly if you've got a narrower fabric. Make sure your patterns are all facing the same way up. I didn't put this on the instructions, but it might be an idea actually to just mark the front of these when you use these again, because we need everything to be mirror imaged. I'll explain that in just a second. So actually if you have a non-directional fabric, and this is a non-directional fabric, so in other words it doesn't matter whether you have the fabric this way or upside down, you can make even more of your pattern pieces, because then we can have one upside down. So you can really squeeze these into a very small area. So that's all you need to make the handles, and the whole of the rest of the fabric here is going to be for the bag. If you have a directional fabric, you're going to use a little bit more of your fabric. Remember, don't use the selvage, and lay them out like that. So you will have a little bit of spare around here, but that's going to give you the maximum amount of fabric on this side to make the body of the bag. So pin all those in place, and you can either draw around them and then cut them out. I actually find that easier because I find it easier to cut around the curves when I don't have the pattern pinned to the fabric, or you can just cut them out as they are. When you cut those out, trim the rest of this fabric to as wide as you can. Now I've still got these right sides together, and with this particular fabric you've actually got an awful lot. So if you take that out of the equation, this is then going to be cut into 4 pieces, 4 equal size pieces. So I can fold this in half, like so, and that could be the whole of the size of my bag. Actually, I think it's too big. So I've actually cut mine down to, on the first 2 kits where you've got 44 inch wide fabric, I've cut it down to 16 inches by 16 inches. If you want it wide, if you can get any more out of the width on a 44 inch or 112 centimetre fabric, then do so. So depending on how you can arrange all of this, you may even be able to get 20 inches. That would be ideal. 20 inches by 16 inches I think is the right kind of size for your bag. So 16 inches is going to be a little bit less than we have here. So 2 pieces, I'm going to call this the lining, and 2 pieces of the outer. I mean, if you want to make a smaller bag, then that's entirely up to you. You can make, if that's the handle there, you could make quite a small bag like so. Maybe more for an evening bag if you wanted to. It doesn't have to be a huge bag like we're going to make here. So when you cut out these pattern pieces for the handles, that's the most important piece first of all, then you can kind of have a play with it. You can see, you can envisage what it's going to look like when you've actually cut those out. Now when you cut out those pieces, which I already have, we are going to take 2 pieces for the top and 2 pieces for the underneath. So this is the handle, and you're going to put your fusible fleece, your H630, on the wrong side of one piece. Doesn't really matter which one if you're going to use this as a reversible bag. I don't think I ever would do with this pattern, to be honest, because I think the blossom is just such a lovely print. I can't see why I'd want to turn it inside out and have plain. But if you're using 2 contrasting patterns, then of course you're going to want to do that. So this is the one that I'm going to have for my handle, and then I'm going to have the cherry blossom for the main part of the bag. So these 3 pieces, I've put my fusible fleece on the wrong side. So if you bought a kit, you're going to have that in the kit. If you're buying your own fabric, I've used H630, which is a Valiseline. You could use H640, it's a little bit heavier. I wouldn't use a Bosal foam, I think that's going to be too heavy. If you don't want to use a fleece interfacing, then maybe a medium weight interfacing would be fine. To be honest, I think without interfacing, you're just going to have a really floppy bag. I think it needs some kind of structure there, which is why I've chosen the H630. And the 2 pieces that I've cut for the rest of the bag are these, and again I've got the fusible fleece on the back. So I've actually managed to get 20 inches in width, and I've cut 16 inches down, so I did have a little bit of fabric left over, maybe enough to make a matching purse. So these 2 pieces again have the fusible fleece on the wrong sides. So let's start sewing these together. So I'm taking the 3, I'm calling this the lining pieces, and we're going to sew, it says on the instructions, long to long and short to short. So that's short to short, and this one is long to long. So we're going to sew those right sides together just across the top. So across these 2 pieces. Second one here. So we've got that. And then do the same with the contrasting fabric. So there's my, where is it? There's my main piece. So short to short and long to long, and you'll see you've got a mirror image of the ones that you've just done, which is why it's so important right at the beginning to put your 2 fabrics right sides together when you cut them out. And the same with this one. So I'm not going to press those at this point. I'm just going to finger crease the seams in opposite directions. And then these 2 pieces here are going to go right sides together. Right, so I'm going to put just a few pins in the seams so I know that they're matching. going to pin it all the way around. I don't think it's necessary. And maybe one just to teach Jen to hold those together. Okay, and then we're going to sew from here to here, from here all the way around and all the way down to here, and then from this point all the way down to here. So I'm not sewing these ends and I'm not sewing the bottom. Those are going to be left open as you saw in your picture. So those bits are not going to be sewn. I'm not sewing here, here and here, so the whole of that is going to be open. And I'm not sewing here, here and here. So finish your stitches at the end of the curves as you sew. So let's take out these pins. And a really important part now is to snip into the curves. So wherever you see a curve, you're going to snip right up to the stitches, but not through them. And this is really going to help to keep those curves, the curves seem to sit flat when we're finishing this. So a nice sharp pair of scissors. And every single curve is going to need to be snipped. Otherwise you'll find that the fabric all puckers and gathers when you turn it through and it doesn't look very neat. Right, that's all done. Then we're going to turn it through to the right side. So starting at the bottom finished end here, you're going to start to turn. Now you may find it useful to have a chopstick or a large knitting needle or something to help pull it through, or a pair of tweezers to just grab hold of that fabric as you're pulling would help. So this might take a little bit of time. There's one. You can see how clipping into the corners really makes a difference around there. And then let's do the same with the shorter side, and then we'll press it. We are going to top stitch around this, but we'll do that when the bag's finished. And that'll really make the edges of your handles really nice and crisp and flat. So that's how we're looking. We now need to join this to this, which looks a little bit odd at the moment, but that's how it works. So when this folds over, that gives you your short handle and your long handle there. So let's open out these two pieces. And we're going to sew these right sides together with the seam meeting in the centre. And there's the iron again. I'll just press that. First of all, before we put that on, I'm going to take both the lining and the outer pieces of my bag, and I'm going to cut a 1-inch square from the bottom corners of each one. Now again, if you wanted a fuller bag, you could have a 2-inch square at the bottom. This is what's going to make the bag face square. So maybe if you make your first one up as the pattern explains, then think, actually I'd like it to be a little bit fatter, then you could make these a little bit bigger. It would make your bag narrower and shorter, but it would make it fatter. So have an experiment. So that's the 2 lining pieces. Then I'll need to do the same with the 2 outer pieces, and then we'll start sewing them together. Okay, so now it's time to put this handle section, and I'm having mine with the plain side outwards to the bag section. So here again my 2 bag pieces, and you can see they are very much wider than the top here. Again, if you've got a smaller piece of fabric, you may not have this amount of width to play with, but it's quite nice with a wider fabric. You've got enough to make quite a few pleats in there if you wanted to. So here I'm going to measure 3 inches from one side, which is here, and I'm going to make a 1-inch pleat. Ultimately, I want this fabric to be the same width as this, which is 11 inches. So I might have to have a play with this a little bit to make it shorter. So measure 3 inches in here, and then make a pleat of about 1 inch. Now that's not big enough. Small enough to fit on here. So I've got choices now. Now in your instructions, if you make your 1-inch pleat and you've got 44-inch wide fabric, that should fit. If it doesn't fit perfectly, you can adjust these pleats a little bit and make them fit. Because this is so much wider, I'm actually going to put another pleat in right next door to the first one. Like so. And I can put another one right next door here. So you can add as many pleats as you like until you get that width, so those 2 are the same width as you see there. I think that looks quite nice with the 2 pleats there. If you find it easy to actually gather, to put a running stitch through there, then of course you can do. Now we need to do this with all of the pieces. So that's all of the, or both of the outer pieces with the wadding, and both of the lining pieces as well, and try to keep them exactly the same. You won't see the front and the back at the same time, to be fair, so don't worry too much about mirror imaging the other side perfectly. As long as they look reasonably the same, I think that's going to be absolutely fine. So again, 3 inches from the side. Remember your narrow fabric, you'll have 1 pleat. And actually, if you can get a wider fabric still, you could make quite a full bag. So when I'm happy now that all of the pieces are the same length across the top, I'm going to sew those pleats in place. Okay, so there's all my 4 pieces. Let's pop those to one side. And now we need to attach the bottom piece to the top. So again, this will be the back of mine because I'm having the plain handle at the top. And I need to sew this to this, right sides together, but only through that 1 piece of fabric. So I'm going to move the back out of the way and then flip this over and sew these 2 pieces together. If you wanted to pin that before you sew, then that's absolutely fine. So you can start to see how the bag is going to look now. So I need to sew the second piece to this side. Now the straps still look a little bit odd, but this will all work, don't worry. So again, I'm going to move the lining piece or the other fabric out of the way because it's just these 2 pieces that I want to sew together. So let's flip that over and sew these. So we have that, and we have a very bulky dog. Now the lining needs to go on the opposite side, so let's turn this all over and do the whole thing again. So on the piece of fabric that you folded back here, we need to put the plain piece on. Or the contrast fabric if you're using two prints. So again, the rest of the fabric goes out of the way. You can see it's starting to get rather big now. And we'll sew these together. And one final piece here. So this one and this one, right sides together. Okay, so let's arrange this so that you can see how the bag's starting to look. It does look like a little girl's pinafore dress at the moment. So that's how we're looking. We now need to sew the rest of the bag together. So let's open this all out, and we need to sew right side to right side. So lift these two up. So we have now the lining pieces on one side and the outer pieces on the other, and move this handle out of the way because we don't want to sew over it. Then we're going to sew all the way round. So line up the seams here, because you'll notice that if they don't line up properly, and we're going to sew all the way around the outer bag apart from those cut out corners. Then we're going to sew all the way around the lining but leave a gap in the lining just big enough to get your hand through, so about 4 or 5 inches, so we can turn this the right side out. So I am going to pin just where the seams are here, just so I can make sure that they match, because they will really stand out if they don't. And that's where I'm going to start sewing. I'm not going to pin all of the rest of it, but again, if you prefer to pin, then pin. Then we're going to take the corners, open them out, and sew straight across, and that makes the bag base square. And I like to just squish the seams in opposite directions, just to make it a little bit less bulky to sew over. So the same on this one, pull the two sides open and sew straight across. And the same on the lining pieces. And then you're going to take your hand through the turning gap and pull the whole thing the right side out. There we go. Just push out those corners. And then you'll have a gap. Now this bag I don't see as being reversible, I don't think I ever would. But if you are using this as a reversible bag, if you've got two prints, then it's important to make a very tiny ladder stitch to close that opening. If you're not going to use this as a reversible bag, then you could, oh that's all in a knot, you could just machine sew the gap opening, so it depends which fabric or which kit you're going for. If you're using a ladder stitch, let's just tie a knot in here. If you weren't aware what one was, we're going to pull that thread and neaten that a little bit. take your needle and thread through one of the folds, so the edges of the fabric are kind of folded in to close the gap. And then you're going to go into one side of the fold and out, second side and out. And this is really important if your bag is reversible, because you don't want to see this when it's on the outside. So the smaller the stitches, the more invisible they're going to be. You can do quite a few stitches like this until you pull them tight, but you can see why it's called a ladder stitch, because these stitches actually look like the rungs of a ladder, and then when you pull them, that closes over. But again, if you're not going to have a reversible bag, then you don't really need to do this. You can if you want to, but you don't really need to do this. And then finally, we're going to push the lining inside the bag. That is a really nice big bag. I'm thinking weekends away, going on picnics, when we can. And the final thing to do is to top stitch all the way around the handle, and that will keep it all in place and keep it looking nice and neat as well. I like to sew from the inside, I just find that easier. And because this is a top stitch, I can lengthen that stitch. So I've got mine on a 3. So let's just snip away the ends of threads. Probably needs one last quick press. Just got a loose thread there. There we go. And that's another knot bag finished. So I hope you found this useful. I hope you enjoy making your knot bags, and I can't wait to see your pictures.